Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments. So this is going to be kind of like a channel update video where I also talk about different things affecting the antiques and collectibles trade right now. So I didn't have time to do a standalone video on each one of these separate topics. That may come depending on what is said in the comment section. I'm sure there's going to be some interest for me to take a deeper dive into some of these talking points. But I do want to talk about several things because it's almost like, and I said this before, we're going back to the 80s. We're going back to the 1990s with a lot of these collecting markets. And, I just keep shaking my head. I don't know if any of you guys are into following auction results. If you saw, Pat the NES Punk did an excellent video. Great at video games. Latest Heritage auction. My video is still in the planning stages on that because I want to take a deeper dive. I will tell you, though, prices are dropping for a lot of top tier items. Even this week I've been swamped answering emails. I have a lot of people coming to me for consultations. And one of the things that they want to do is get out of that particular market. I think it's okay to say that because there's a lot of talk, even on collecting forums, stating that, hey, some of these prices are not going to hold. And as a result, there's a lot of people that are looking to either run towards the exit or at least start liquidating some of their holdings as a result. And I want to tell you something here, guys. None of these particular items, none of these particular graded games are going to become more scarcer than they already are. If anything, the population reports being put out, when they are being put out by some of these grading companies, is only going to increase as time goes on. And I want to make that very clear. That's why there's certain titles that I really believe are being held back, because people know that once it gets out, that particular game, there's no longer just 4 or 5 copies of it and that said grade. The market is going to cause a massive correction for that particular item. And that's what we're seeing. And again, Pat the NES Punk did an excellent job on the video that he put out on this. I'm not going to rehash old territory or take away from his thunder. If you guys want to watch that particular video, it literally came out within the last week or two, and it was on graded video games and the prices that they are experiencing right now. And he did some excellent reports on some of those top tier games that really show you how much they're falling in value. In certain cases, guys, people are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars on some of these items. Now, with that being said, I do have to point this out. Otherwise, the video game collecting community is going to come after me with torches and pitchforks drawn. There are certain games, yes, that are still either accelerating in value or maintaining their value, but they are few and far between compared to the ones that are dropping. You guys need to understand speculative markets. I have done several videos now on this channel, even one video where I go into detail on the 5 stages of a speculative bubble. And I remember when I put that video out, there was one person that literally emailed me 3 times in one day telling me that I made that up. That was actually pulled from literally a book I talk about on this channel consistently. No, I'm not going to name the book in this video, that tells you about speculative bubbles as it relates to the antiques and collectibles trade and also the financial markets. I did not make any of this stuff up, guys. All the concepts that I teach on this channel have been written in trade doctrine, trade books, books on the antiques and collectibles trade, finance books, and the like that were taught to me by my mentors. Remember, guys, I know I look younger than I am. I am in my mid-40s. I am actually closer to 46 now than I am the age of 45. And I've been involved in these markets since the age of 12. This is very vital for a lot of you guys to understand, because the lessons that I teach on this channel are going to help you in your quest, whether you want to become a top-tier speculator, an investor, a dealer, or you just want to be a better collector. Just understand that you should not be putting all your money in antiques and collectibles solely. It's no different when I get into discussions or heated arguments with the gold bugs, the crypto people. Look, if you want to play around in a lot of these alternate asset markets, feel free to do so. You're going to get an education in economics. You're going to get an education one way or another in finance, and you're going to get an education as to how markets work, both over the short term and over the long term. But at the end of the day, this is almost on par. Some of these markets, not all of them, some of them are on par with gambling. And if you're going to gamble in that manner, you should only bet what you can afford to lose. And also, always remember, guys, when you gamble, the house always has the advantage. And nobody here that I am engaging with has as much knowledge as the proverbial house does in any of these markets. Otherwise, you would be manipulating these markets. You would not be speculating in them. You would not be arguing with me over how great an investment Pokemon is, or great at video games, or comic books, or vintage toys, whatever it is. You need to understand these core concepts. With that being said, where we go from here, one of the criticisms that I routinely get on this channel is that, Sean, it's too negative. You guys need to understand how I'm presenting this material. I am teaching all the core financial basics first. Then we're going to get into more advanced talking points and topics. Then I'm going to teach you how to write a written plan as to how to analyze these markets, invest in these markets. Then we're going to go back. We're going to look at graded video games. We're going to look at Pokemon cards. We're going to look at all of these top collecting categories. And based on what you know from watching all the videos that I've put out, you're going to see these markets in a different light. Some of you are already coming to me, hey, Sean, since I found your channel, I analyze these markets in a whole new way. That's what I'm here for. Again, no disrespect to the Pokemon people, no disrespect to the comic guys, no disrespect to the video game collectors. I've said this before, I will say it again. I am not here to hold your hand and walk down memory lane and talk to you about Pikachus, Charizards, Planeswalkers, Sonic the Hedgehogs, Bonk's Adventures, or Mario's. What I am here to do is show you collectible finance. That's what this channel is about. This is not a nostalgia-based channel. That's why I will never most likely have 50,000 or 100,000 subscribers. It's not in the cards. Nobody wants to hear the truth. They want to hear that if they put all their money in these markets, everything's going to be fine. They're going to sell out at a top tier price and their whole future is going to be set. And that's not how these markets work at all. But as somebody who speculates in these markets and also has in the past engaged in market manipulation, I hope you get that out of this, because that way there's always going to be Timmys, Kimmys, and Poindexters to manipulate when I try to invest in a lot of these top tier markets, sad to say. With that said, let's go on to the next talking point. For those of you unaware, CGC, yes, the CGC that you all know and love that grades comic books, among other particular collectibles, they have decided to get into the market of grading Funko Pops. Now, for those unaware, I have done a video on Funko Pops. It was done long time ago on this particular YouTube channel. I pretty much compare Funko Pops to Beanie Babies 2.0. And yes, I know that upsets the Funko Pop community. I know I get tons of emails. I get comments on some of the videos where I state that. I even get feedback from the articles that I write for Antiques and Auction News. I get a lot of 20+ collectors that reach out and say, hey, that's really an unfair analysis. Nope. It's spot on, as a lot of you guys are going to learn over the years. Those of you that are holding a lot of these mass-produced, scarce collectibles for the long term. Well, CGC has decided to enter this market, and this really has me kind of, I'm going to just say this, disappointed in CGC. CGC made some very interesting decisions on what they're going to start to grade. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. Supposedly, they're now starting to gear up to launch their division that is going to grade video games. Then they made the decision to announce that they are going to be grading factory sealed VHS movies and now Funko Pops. And in my opinion, these are all speculative markets. They're easy cash grabs, but they're all speculative. I would rather see CGC, or the Certified Collectibles Group, that's the parent company of CGC, I would rather see them get into hardcore toy grading and compete directly with AFA, Action Figure Authority. Now, I don't know, to give CGC and the Certified Collectibles Group credit, I don't know if they're starting to grade Funko Pops just because it's the easiest thing to get into. Then maybe they're going to branch off and start venturing into vintage Star Wars figures, G.I. Joe, Masters of the Universe, whatever. I hope they go in that direction, because I seriously believe, as much as I love AFA and also CGC, to be fair, I would love to see them, though, have more competition in the toy grading marketplace. There really isn't too many top tier grading companies that are involved in that market at present time. So I'm kind of hoping that CGC does go in that direction. And the idea to grade Funko Pops is just a way to raise revenue and to kind of market their services to that particular crowd. So then that way, if somebody does have, a carded vinyl Cape Jawa that they want to send in, they can choose between AFA and now possibly CGC. So that's just my take on that. I really don't like how certain grading companies are just starting to capitalize on what's easiest to go after. And right now that's video games, that's Funko Pops, that's graded VHS movies. I mean, think of it this way, guys. If back in the 90s, there was a third-party grading company that was as reputable as CGC or even AFA, and they started to encase and grade Beanie Babies, that market could have been more of a disaster than what it ended up. I mean, there would have been people that would have lost a lot more money than they did just back in the 90s with Beanie Babies. I mean, it would have been disastrous. And honestly, I don't think that grading companies realize in certain instances how much power they wield in the overall market, and they need to really be careful over what markets they get involved with, because as we've seen with graded video games, I'm going to say it, with the alleged market manipulation and the controversy surrounding Wada Games, it can damage individuals, companies, collectors' perception of that company going forward. And there's a lot of people that reach out to me. They will not use Wada Games. And even I tell them, look, right now, if you want to get this stuff graded, you want to dump it in the market, just use Wada Games, because at the very least, with some of the vintage games, if you're going to sell them, certain collectors, they're still drawn to that particular company and the items that they grade. Don't get me wrong, VGA has a lot of credibility. They're affiliated with AFA. But in a lot of the high-profile auctions, people still associate Wada Games with getting a higher dollar amount at auction, sad to say. So that's why when I have clients of mine that are trying to decide between Wada Games and VGA, if it's a vintage video game, it's factory sealed, I will honestly tell them, and I hate to have to repeat this on this channel, but it's 100% truth, send it to Wada and just consign it to auction and get what you get in this particular market right now. The market for vintage video games and graded video games, as much as there is a massive correction in it, as I predict it, it's still quite strong. There are a lot of collectors that are still drawn to that market. It's just that prices are changing on a regular basis because it's so speculative. And I hate to say it, it was a speculative bubble that propped it up along with market manipulation. That's how we got to this point, guys. Let's go on to another topic. So I do have to touch on this. I don't want to spend too much time on this talking point, but the reserve list is not being reprinted. That's all I'm going to say. We're going to go on to the final talking point. But I do want to comment a little bit on this because there's a lot of bad information being put out on collecting forums, on YouTube videos that are being made, and a lot of these individuals, I think, know better. But let me just state this. Thanks to wonderful Wizards of the Coast deciding to open Vintage Legends booster boxes and putting a lot of those cards into collector booster boxes of the new upcoming Magic the Gathering set, Dominaria United, there's a lot of people that want to latch on to the conspiracy theory that somehow they're reprinting the reserve list and they don't want anybody to know. I want to echo the opinions of Alpha Investments, believe it or not. He did a video where he stated if they were to reproduce these cards and try to fool the public, it would not work because anybody who knows how those vintage cards from 1994, I think is when Legends came out, look like and appear, they would be able to tell the difference in today's printing mechanics. And I agree with that 100%. You're not going to be able to perfectly manufacture a vintage card. You're going to be able to tell the way the card feels, the way the card smells, how the ink quality is. There are ways to determine an authentic vintage piece from a modern era reproduction, even if it's reprinted by the company, the same company that reproduced the originals. You guys need to understand that. Any antique appraiser like myself could easily explain that to you. It is very hard to replicate something even 10 years ago from today, let alone 30 or 40. That's why when we talk about rare coins, currency, it's very hard to fake that stuff because a lot of that stuff was made literally in certain instances hundreds if not thousands of years ago. In fact, I'm going to make a controversial point right now. It's almost easier to fake something from thousands of years ago than it is from something that was made decades ago or maybe 100, 200 years. With that being said, I'm not going to spend any more time on that. Just know if anybody is telling you that they are breaking the reserve list or they are going behind the scenes and they're reprinting these cards, it is 100% false. Now we get to the final talking point of this video. In case you haven't heard, this is ultra breaking news. eBay is buying TCG Player. Now, for those of you that have stayed to the end of this particular video and are listening to me talk about this, you are in for a real treat. I don't know if you know this, Harry Rinker did some excellent articles where he talked about consolidation in the overall antiques and collectibles trade that occurred back in the 1990s with a lot of companies buying other companies, auction companies were merging and the like. We are seeing that again today in the year 2022. We have auction companies that for some reason are allowed to own grading companies and vice versa. We have companies like eBay that are making moves where they're buying other collectible powerhouses. And as a result, I think it's wise that I do a video on that just to pretty much educate a lot of you on what happened back in the 1990s and how it ended up not ending well for a lot of the average collectors, investors, speculators, and enthusiasts that operate in these markets. Consolidation in the antiques and collectibles trade is usually bad for collectors, speculators, and investors by and large because it creates less competition. It's almost like a lot of these companies are colluding against the average speculator or collector who is operating in this market. So I personally was not pleased to hear the news that eBay is buying TCG Player. But as I said before, we have auction companies that own grading companies and grading companies that own auction companies, and other auction companies are buying out or merging with other auction companies to increase their stranglehold and to get a lock on some of these markets. Why the FTC isn't involved, I have no idea. Well, I do know. It's because everybody fears government oversight and regulation in the year 2022, which is something that was not commonplace back in the 1980s and back in the 1990s. So most likely, expect that video to be put in production on what happened in the late 1980s, early 1990s, with consolidation in the antiques and collectibles trade and how it ended up. And be very careful in these markets, guys. We are going back to the 1980s, to the 1990s, where everything that is old is new again. All these tricks have came before us, and we all see the devastating effects as to how they played out. You know, I want to end this video on a note to the Pokemon crowd. A lot of you guys tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, or it's going to be different this time, or I tell you guys about the book Mint Condition and tell you guys to read that book because it talks about the junk wax era of sports cards. And you keep telling me, hey, Sean, you know, I think the Pokemon company knows what they're doing. They've been around for 25, almost 30 years. And I keep stating to you, guess what? Topps Chewing Gum also knew what they were doing when they took advantage of the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters back during the 1980s baseball card boom. And guess what? Topps is still around today, but there's a lot of those collectors, speculators, and investors that ended up going bankrupt as a result of Topps Chewing Gum Company profiting from that market at the hands of those Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters. You really have to understand how these markets work, how it fits into the scheme of things. You know, remember, guys, always remember this. Most of these companies, if they are publicly traded companies on Wall Street, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. So let me put this in perspective for you. If you happen to own Hasbro stock, Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast. Hasbro has a fiduciary responsibility to you as the shareholder. They do not have a responsibility to their customers, to their distributors, to their employees, as much as you think they do. In a capitalistic society, the shareholder always wins. They are never, ever going to do anything on purpose to upset the shareholder, because that means that their stock price is going to be affected. And if it's affected due to negligence, they're going to get sued in a court of law. It doesn't matter what the Timmys, Kimmys, and Poindexters who buy their products think about it. Now, at the end of the day, obviously every company wants to do right for their customers because they want them to buy more. They want them to like the product and they want them to buy more. Do with that information what you will. Just know a lot of these markets rest on nothing but speculation and the greater fool theory. And a lot of you guys are buying into it hook, line, and sinker, not understanding the fundamentals, which is where the channel Reserved Investments comes in, to at least explain this to you so you can't say, hey, nobody ever told me that was happening behind the scenes, or I didn't know that was mass-produced scarcity, or I didn't understand the factors of control, or I don't know the difference between speculation and investing. Well, if you watch this channel on a regular basis, this is stuff that should be relevant to you, and you need to understand these talking points to become a better speculator, collector, investor, or just somebody that watches this channel and says, you know what, Sean, I'm going to send you an email because I am so glad I'm not involved in the antiques and collectibles trade. I'm glad I'm not doing anything with alternate asset classes. I don't touch gold. I don't touch crypto. I put most of my money in traditional stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, index funds, and real estate. I want none of those headaches. And I do get emails like that. You know, I said this before. There's people that work for Goldman Sachs. I have hedge fund managers that watch this YouTube channel and they love the content I produce. Whenever I have these conversations, though, with people in the Pokemon crowd or the vintage video game crowd or some of these other speculative markets, they claim I don't know what I'm talking about. I assure you, we've seen this all before, guys. All the information is right in front of you. Some of you don't even bother to look at the books in the background that you should be reading to get an education on this stuff. Even if you don't like me, you don't like the way that I present this material, it'll take you literally half an hour every 2 weeks for you to log on to Auction News, antiquesandauctionnews.net, and read one of my articles. And even if you don't agree with it, at least get an education, at least see another perspective for somebody that's been involved in these markets since the age of 12. That's all I ask. If you get something out of these videos, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching and have a great night.